Ambassador Jin Ho stepped into the massive council chamber, his boots clicking against the polished crystal floor. The sound echoed through the enormous space, making him feel incredibly small. Above him, the NIGMA Council sat on floating platforms that glowed with soft blue light. 12 different alien species looked down at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright disgust. The humans had been trying to establish peaceful colonies on the edge of known space for the past 5 years. They weren't bothering anyone, just building farms and small settlements on empty worlds. But apparently the NIGMA Empire considered all of this space to be theirs, even planets they had never visited. Jin Ho had been chosen as humanity's representative because of his calm nature and diplomatic experience. He had dealt with difficult negotiations before, but nothing quite like this. The aliens around him were ancient, powerful, and clearly used to getting their way without question. The Prime Arbiter, a being that looked like living crystal with pulsing veins of light running through its body, leaned forward on its platform. Its voice came through the translation device with a mechanical coldness that made Jin Ho's skin crawl. Your species has exactly one standard galactic cycle to comply with our demands, the Arbiter announced. All human settlements in NIGMA space must submit to our authority. You will pay tribute of 30% of all resources harvested. Your military vessels will be surrendered to our fleet commanders. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your colonies. The other council members nodded in agreement. Jin Ho could see that this was routine for them. How many other species had stood in this exact spot, hearing these exact words? How many had simply given up and accepted slavery rather than face destruction? But humans were different. They had learned hard lessons throughout their history about what happened when you gave bullies what they wanted. They just asked for more. Jin Ho straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the Prime Arbiter. His voice was steady and clear when he spoke. The human colonies have done nothing wrong. We've settled on empty worlds that no one was using. We've harmed no one and taken nothing that belonged to others. We came here seeking only to build new homes for our people. The Arbiter's light pulsed brighter, a sign of irritation. Your intentions are irrelevant. This entire sector belongs to the NIGMA Empire. Your presence here is an invasion, whether you intended it or not. Then we have a simple solution, Jin Ho replied. We're reasonable people. We don't want to fight anyone. All we ask is to be left alone to live our lives in peace. Grant us that peace and you'll have peace in return. Several council members made sounds that the translator interpreted as laughter. The Arbiter's crystal body flashed with what looked like amusement. You misunderstand your position, human. You are not negotiating. You are being informed of your fate. Your species has exactly one cycle to comply, or your colonies will burn. Jin Ho felt a cold anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm and level. This was the moment that would determine everything that came after. The choice he made here would affect billions of human lives. I understand your position perfectly, he said quietly, and I want to make sure you understand ours. We don't seek conflict with your empire. We don't want to take your worlds or challenge your authority over your own people. All we want is to be left alone. He paused, letting his words sink in. The chamber had grown completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's system seemed to fade away. But if you force us to choose between slavery and war, we will choose war. And if you force that choice upon us, you will regret it for whatever time your empire has left. This is not a threat. This is a promise. This is your only warning. The silence stretched on for long seconds. Jin Ho could feel the weight of alien, eyes studying him, trying to determine if he was bluffing. Finally, the Prime Arbiter's laughter filled the chamber again. Your species will learn the price of defiance soon enough. Guards, escort this human back to his ship. Let him carry our message to his people. As Jin Ho was led from the chamber, he caught the eye of one council member who hadn't laughed with the others. The being's expression was thoughtful, perhaps, even concerned. At least one of them had heard the warning for what it truly was. The die was cast. In 1 month, the NIGMA Empire would learn what happened when you cornered a species that had survived ice ages, world wars, and countless other disasters through sheer stubborn determination to never give up. Admiral Yejin stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Harmony's shield, Watching the tactical display with steady eyes, 50 massive alien warships were approaching New Busan, a peaceful farming world where families grew crops to feed the growing human colonies. The ships were enormous, each one the size of a small city, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. This was how the NIGMA Empire always worked. They would pick the most defenseless target they could find and make an example of it. Destroy a farming world, kill innocent families, and terrorize everyone else into submission. It was a strategy that had worked for 3,000 years across hundreds of different species, but they had never faced humans before. Ye Jin had grown up on New Busan herself, running through fields of golden wheat as a child. She knew every valley, every hill, every stream on that world. What the NIGMA fleet didn't know was that those innocent-looking farms hid secrets that would change everything. "Admiral, NIGMA fleet is moving into bombardment position," reported Lieutenant Min-Soo from the sensor station. His voice was calm, but Ye Jin could hear the tension underneath. Everyone on the bridge had friends or family on New Busan. "Are our people ready down there?" Ye Jin asked. "Commander Tae-yang confirms all defensive systems are online. The farmers have been evacuated to the underground shelters. We're as ready as we can be." Ye Jin nodded. The plan had been years in the making. When humans first started settling, in this region of space, they knew conflict with the NIGMA Empire was inevitable, so they had prepared. Every colony world had been carefully chosen, not just for farming or mining, but for its defensive potential. On the surface, New Busan looked like any other agricultural world. Rolling hills covered with crops, small farming communities, peaceful rivers winding through valleys. But underneath, buried deep in the rock and hidden beneath the fields, lay the most advanced defensive network humanity had ever built. The NIGMA fleet commander probably thought this would be over in minutes. Drop out of faster-than-light travel, position the ships above the major population centers, and rain death from the sky. Simple, quick, and terrifying to anyone watching from other worlds. "NIGMA fleet is beginning bombardment," Min-Soo announced. Ye Jin watched the tactical display as energy beams and missiles began falling toward New Busan. The first wave of attacks struck the planet's surface, creating massive explosions that lit up the atmosphere. From space it looked like the world was dying, but Commander Tae-yang, hidden in a command bunker 3 miles underground, was watching something very different. The bombardment was hitting exactly where they wanted it to hit, carefully prepared decoy targets that looked like cities and farms from orbit, but were actually empty shells. "Phase 1 complete," Tae-yang's voice came through the secure communication channel. "All civilians are safe in the deep shelters. NIGMA fleet is fully committed to the attack pattern, initiating defensive grid activation." What happened next had never been seen before in galactic warfare. Across New Busan's surface, sections of farmland began to shift and move. What looked like innocent hills split open to reveal massive weapon systems. Underground launchers that had been disguised as irrigation systems rotated toward the sky. The NIGMA fleet had no warning. One moment they were raining destruction on what they thought was a helpless farming world. The next moment, that world was shooting back with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to impossible speeds, tore through the vacuum of space. These weren't normal weapons that used explosives or energy beams. These were chunks of dense metal, moving so fast they hit with the force of nuclear weapons. When they struck the NIGMA ships, the alien vessels simply disintegrated, torn apart by pure kinetic energy. But the kinetic launchers were just the beginning. Energy weapons that bent space itself, carved through NIGMA shields like they weren't even there. Point defense systems that could track and destroy hundreds of targets simultaneously turned incoming missiles into clouds of harmless debris. "Admiral." Ye Jin watched in amazement as the tactical display showed NIGMA ships disappearing one by one. These were vessels that had conquered countless worlds, ships with shields and armor that had never been penetrated, but humanity's weapons were cutting through them like paper. The NIGMA fleet commander must have been in shock. His forces had expected to face maybe a few outdated defensive satellites or some primitive missile launchers. Instead, they were being systematically destroyed by weapons that used principles of physics the Empire didn't even understand. Within 6 hours, 25 NIGMA dreadnoughts were nothing but expanding clouds of debris. The remaining ships were fleeing in panic, broadcasting desperate emergency signals back to their home base. Commander Tae Yang opened a communication channel to the retreating alien ships. His voice was calm and professional when he spoke. NIGMA vessels. This is new. Busan Defense Command. Your attack on our civilian population was unprovoked and unacceptable. We could have destroyed all of your ships, but we chose to let some of you survive. Return to your empire and deliver this message. You were warned. Next time, we won't be so merciful. The surviving NIGMA ships jumped to faster-than-light speed without responding, carrying news of their defeat back to an empire that had never tasted failure. The news from New Busan had spread through the NIGMA empire like wildfire. An entire punishment fleet, 50 of their most powerful warships, reduced to scrap metal by farmers. The empire's leaders were furious and embarrassed. No species had ever dared to resist them so effectively, and certainly no species had ever made them look weak. So they decided to end this human problem once and for all. Every member species of the empire contributed ships to the largest military force ever assembled. 3,000 warships from 12 different alien civilizations, each one bringing their most advanced technology and deadliest weapons. Fleet Marshal Hyarin stood in the command center of humanity's home system, watching the massive enemy. Fleet approached through long-range sensors. The numbers were overwhelming. Even if every human ship fought perfectly, they were outnumbered 50 to 1. Any normal military commander would have been terrified, but Hyarin wasn't normal, and neither was humanity's military. She had helped design the defense strategy they were about to use, and she knew something the NIGMA Empire didn't. This wasn't going to be a normal space battle. Marshal NIGMA fleet is dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, reported her aide, Lieutenant Seok Jin. They're forming standard attack formations. It looks like they plan to sweep through the system and destroy everything in their path. Hyarin nodded calmly. Are our ships ready? Captain Dongwu reports all vessels are connected to the network. We have 200 ships in position, but Marshal... Seok Jin hesitated. 200 against 3,000. Are you sure about this? Trust the plan, Lieutenant, and trust our people. The NIGMA fleet moved into the system like a massive wall of destruction. Their ships were arranged in perfect military formations, each species' vessels grouped together in precise geometric patterns. It was an impressive sight. The combined might of an empire that had ruled this part of the galaxy for millennia. What they expected to find was a desperate human fleet, maybe a few hundred ships trying to make a hopeless last stand around their homeworld. What they found instead was something that shouldn't have been possible. Captain Dongwu sat in the command chair of his ship, the Unity's Edge, but he wasn't really controlling just one vessel. Through quantum communication links, his mind was connected to every human ship in the system. He could see through their sensors, think with their computers, and coordinate their movements as if they were all parts of his own body. This was humanity's greatest secret. While other species built bigger ships and more powerful weapons, humans had learned to fight as a single organism. Every ship was connected to every other ship through quantum entanglement networks that allowed instant communication across any distance. When the NIGMA fleet entered weapons range, they opened fire with everything they had. Thousands of energy beams and missiles filled the space between the fleets. It should have been enough firepower to destroy anything in their path. But the human ships moved like they were alive. They flowed around incoming attacks, twisted through impossible maneuvers, and seemed to know exactly where each shot was going before it was fired. What looked like 200 separate vessels was actually one distributed intelligence that could process information and react faster than any individual commander. The first NIGMA ships to be destroyed probably thought it was just bad luck. Our human vessel would appear out of nowhere, fire a precise shot at exactly the right spot, and disappear again before return fire could reach it. But as more ships were lost, the alien commanders began to realize they were facing something unprecedented. Every time the NIGMA forces destroyed a human ship, something strange would happen. The remaining human vessels would suddenly become more effective, their attacks more precise, their movements more coordinated. It was as if destroying one ship made all the others stronger instead of weaker. Dongwu felt each loss as if it were a part of his own body being torn away, but he also felt the knowledge and experience of each destroyed ship flowing into the network. Every mistake, every successful attack, every piece of tactical information was instantly shared with every surviving vessel. The NIGMA fleet had 3,000 ships, but they were fighting as 3,000 separate units. Each captain made his own decisions, each species used its own tactics, and communication between different parts of the fleet was slow and clumsy. The human fleet had 200 ships, but they fought as one mind with 200 bodies. They could coordinate attacks that would have been impossible for individual ships to pull off. When one ship distracted an enemy vessel, another would attack from the perfect angle at the exact right moment. The battle raged for hours across the entire solar system. NIGMA ships found themselves lured into traps they couldn't see coming, ambushed by enemies that seemed to appear from empty space, and outmaneuvered by tactics that defied everything they knew about space combat. Admiral Kortak of the NIGMA Third Fleet was one of the Empire's most experienced commanders. He had conquered dozens of worlds and never lost a major battle. But as he watched his forces being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought like nothing he had ever encountered, he realized they had made a terrible mistake. "All ships, withdraw immediately," he broadcast on the emergency frequency. "This is not a battle we can win." The surviving NIGMA vessels fled the system in chaos, leaving behind the wreckage of over 2,000 warships. The largest military force in galactic history had been shattered by a human fleet 1/15th its size. In the aftermath, Dongwu sat quietly in his command chair, feeling the phantom pain of lost connections. They had won, but the cost had been higher than anyone wanted to pay. Still, they had sent a message that would echo across the galaxy. Humanity would not be conquered. Colonel Mi Young had never wanted to be a destroyer of civilizations. Growing up on Earth, she had dreamed of exploring distant stars and meeting new alien friends. But war has a way of changing people's dreams into nightmares, and the NIGMA Empire had forced humanity into a corner where there was only one way out. Her fleet was small by galactic standards, just 30 ships moving through the outer regions of NIGMA space, but these weren't the massive warships that most empires used for conquest. These were something far more dangerous, precision instruments designed to cut apart the invisible threads that held a civilization together. The first target was a communication relay station orbiting a gas giant in the Kepler sector. From the outside, it looked like just another piece of space infrastructure, a collection of dishes and transmitters that helped carry messages between distant worlds. But Mi Young knew this particular station was critical to the Empire's command structure. Destroy it and 12 entire star systems would be cut off from central command. "Target acquired," reported Commander Jae Hyun from the weapons station. "No defensive ships in the area. They don't even know we're here." That was the beauty of humanity's new strategy. The NIGMA Empire was used to traditional warfare. Massive. Fleets meeting in open battle. Planets besieged for months, entire systems conquered through brute force. They had never faced an enemy that preferred to remain invisible, striking at targets they didn't even know were important. The relay station was destroyed in less than 30 seconds. A few precisely placed shots from stealth ships that appeared out of nowhere, then vanished again before anyone could respond. To most observers, it would look like equipment failure or maybe a lucky hit by space pirates, but Mi Young knew better. Somewhere in NIGMA space, military commanders were suddenly finding themselves unable to communicate with their fleets. Supply. Officers were losing track of cargo shipments. Government officials were discovering that their orders weren't reaching distant colonies. "Next target is the automated factory complex in the Rigel system," Mi Young announced to her crew. "Intelligence reports indicate it produces 60% of the Empire's military communications equipment." The factory was more heavily defended than the relay station, with a small fleet of patrol ships and orbital defense platforms. But the human ships slipped past the defenses like ghosts, using technology that made them nearly invisible to NIGMA sensors. The attack came from inside the factory's own cargo bay. Human infiltration teams had spent weeks studying the facilities, operations, learning its schedules and security procedures. When the moment came, they struck from within while Mi Young's ships provided cover from outside. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. 50 years of accumulated military production capacity vanished in a single brilliant flash. But more importantly, the Empire's ability to replace damaged communication equipment had been crippled. This pattern repeated across dozens of star systems. Human strike teams would appear without warning, destroy a critical facility, and disappear before any response could be organized. Sometimes they targeted power plants that supplied energy to entire sectors. Other times, they hit food processing, centers that fed millions of people. Always they chose targets that would cause maximum disruption with minimum loss of life. The Empire's leaders were baffled. How were humans moving through their space undetected? How did they know which targets were truly important? How were they coordinating attacks across such vast distances? The answer came during the 4th month of what historians would later call the Silent War. Subin, a human intelligence operative who had been working undercover in the Empire for years, decided it was time to reveal the truth. She hijacked every communication channel in NIGMA space simultaneously: military frequencies, civilian broadcasts, even private messages between government officials. Her voice reached every planet, every ship, every listening post in the Empire at the same time. Leaders of the NIGMA Empire, Subin's calm voice echoed across 1,000 worlds. My name is Subin, and I represent humanity's intelligence services. For the past 7 years, since our first contact with your empire, we have been watching you. The reaction was immediate panic. Government officials tried to cut the transmission, but found that their own communication systems were no longer under their control. Military commanders discovered that their secure channels had been compromised. Even the Emperor's private communications were being broadcast openly. Every transmission you have sent, we have intercepted, Subin continued. Every strategy meeting, every military plan, every secret negotiation, we have recorded and analyzed it all. You believed you were the hunters, and we were the prey. But you were wrong. We have been studying you like insects under a microscope. To prove her point, Subin began broadcasting classified NIGMA military documents, battle plans that were supposed to be top secret, the locations of secret bases that only a handful of officials knew about, personal communications between high-ranking commanders discussing their fears and weaknesses. You know nothing about humanity except what we have chosen to show you. Subin's voice carried a note of cold satisfaction. But we know everything about you. We know which of you are brave and which are cowards. We know who can be trusted and who will betray their own people to save themselves. We know exactly how to destroy everything you have built, piece by piece. The psychological impact was devastating. Across the Empire, government officials began to suspect each other of being human spies. Military commanders became paranoid about their own staff. Citizens lost faith in their leaders' ability to protect them. But the worst part was the realization that humanity had been telling the truth from the beginning. They really hadn't wanted to fight. They had simply wanted to be left alone. The Empire had forced this war upon them, and now they were reaping the consequences of their own arrogance. As Subin's broadcast ended, the lights began going out across NIGMA space, not literally, but functionally. Communication networks stayed down. Supply lines remained severed. Administrative centers struggled to maintain basic operations. The great NIGMA Empire, which had ruled this sector of the galaxy for 3,000 years, was slowly bleeding to death from 1,000 tiny cuts. And the humans who were killing, it remained as invisible and untouchable as ghosts in the darkness. Mi Young looked out at the stars from her ship's bridge and wondered if this was what victory was supposed to feel like. She had helped cripple an empire without destroying a single world or killing millions of innocent people. But somehow, the silence of dead communication networks felt more ominous than the roar of exploding battleships. The war was almost over. Soon there would be a reckoning. The great assembly hall on Nexus Station had never been so quiet. 7 months ago, this same chamber had echoed with the arrogant laughter of the NIGMA Council as they dismissed humanity's warning. Now, representatives from 12 different alien species sat in stunned silence, trying to understand how their mighty empire had simply stopped existing. Ambassador Jinho walked slowly to the center of the circular chamber, his footsteps the only sound in the vast space. He looked older than he had 7 months ago, more tired, but his eyes held a quiet satisfaction. The simple, diplomatic uniform he wore was the same one he had worn during that first meeting, when the Empire had given humanity its ultimatum. Around him sat the former rulers of 1,000 worlds. The crystalline beings who had once commanded vast fleets now represented only their home planets. The insectoid warriors who had conquered dozens of species were reduced to speaking for a single star system. The energy beings who had believed themselves superior to all organic life found themselves pleading for basic trade agreements. 7 months ago I stood in this chamber and delivered a simple message, Jinho began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. We asked only to be left in peace. We warned you what would happen if you forced us to choose between slavery and war. He paused, letting his words sink in. Some of the alien representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. Many of you laughed at that warning. You saw humanity as a primitive species, barely capable of space travel, certainly no threat to an empire that had ruled for 3,000 years. You were wrong, but not in the way you think. Jinho activated a holographic display that showed the current state of what had once been NIGMA space. Instead of the unified empire that had existed 7 months ago, the display showed hundreds of independent worlds, each governing itself, each struggling to maintain basic services without the vast infrastructure that had once connected them. We didn't conquer your empire, Jinho continued. We didn't need to. We simply understood it better than you did yourselves. Senator Vorthak, one of the insectoid representatives, clicked his mandibles nervously before speaking. Human ambassador, our military analysts still cannot explain how you achieved such devastating results with so few ships. Your fleet was outnumbered hundreds to 1. Jinho smiled sadly. That's because you're still thinking like an empire. You believed that strength came from having the biggest fleets, the most powerful weapons, the most territory. But those things only made you vulnerable. He gestured to the holographic display, zooming in on specific star systems. Your empire was like a vast web, with thousands of connections holding it together. Communication networks, supply lines, administrative systems, economic dependencies. Each thread was strong, but the web itself was fragile. Representative Zilara, speaking for the energy beings, pulsed with confused patterns of light. But how did you know which threads to cut? Our security was absolute. Our plans were secret. Were they? Jinho asked quietly. You sent diplomats to meet with us. You transmitted orders across your empire. You held strategy meetings and recorded them for posterity. Every time you communicated, every time you sent a signal, every time you thought you were secure, we were listening. The revelation hit the assembly like a physical blow. Conversations that they had thought were private, plans they had believed were secret, personal communications they had assumed were safe, all of it had been monitored and analyzed by human intelligence services. For 7 years, since our first contact, we studied you, Jinho explained. Not because we wanted to attack you, but because we wanted to understand you. We learned your languages, your customs, your fears, your strengths, and your weaknesses. We mapped every connection in your vast empire and identified every critical point. Dr. Kethmoru, representing the research-focused species that had developed much of the Empire's technology, spoke up with a trembling voice. But why? Why go to such lengths if you truly wanted peace? Jinho's expression grew stern. Because we've learned from our own history that peace is only possible when both sides understand the cost of war. We hoped that understanding would prevent conflict. When it didn't, that same understanding allowed us to end the conflict quickly and with minimal loss of life. He activated another display, showing casualty figures from the 7-month war. The numbers were shockingly low. Thousands of military personnel lost on both sides, but virtually no civilian casualties. We could have destroyed your worlds, Jinho said softly. "We could have killed billions of your people. Instead, we chose to dismantle your empire's ability to function as a unified threat while leaving your individual worlds intact. Every species represented here still exists. Your people are still alive. Your cultures are still preserved." The former emperor of the NIGMA Empire, a being of living crystal whose light had dimmed considerably over the past months, finally spoke. "What happens now? Will you create your own empire to replace ours?" Jinho shook his head firmly. "We told you 7 months ago that we sought no empire. We meant it. What we want now is the same thing we wanted then, to be left in peace, to build our colonies and live our lives." He gestured to encompass the entire assembly. "But we also recognize that you need time to rebuild your societies, to establish new forms of government, to create new relationships with your neighbors. That's why we're proposing the formation of this new galactic assembly, not as an empire, but as a forum where all species can meet as equals." Representative Quindar, speaking for one of the smaller species that had been oppressed under NIGMA rule, asked hesitantly, "And if conflicts arise between our worlds? If old grudges lead to new wars? Then we will help mediate those conflicts." Jinho replied, "Not as conquerors or rulers, but as peacekeepers. We've proven that we understand how to end wars quickly and efficiently. We hope that knowledge will help prevent wars from starting in the first place." The assembly sat in contemplative silence for several long minutes. Finally, the former emperor spoke again, his crystalline voice heavy with resignation and perhaps a touch of respect. "We underestimated you completely. We saw your small fleets and simple technology and assumed you were weak. We never imagined that your greatest weapon was your ability to understand your enemies better than they understood themselves." Jinho nodded solemnly. "Understanding is always more powerful than firepower. We didn't destroy your empire with superior weapons. We dissolved it by knowing exactly where and how to apply pressure. Every action we took was calculated to achieve maximum strategic effect with minimum destruction." As the session ended and representatives began filing out to return to their transformed worlds, Jinho remained standing in the center of the chamber. The war was over, the empire was gone, and a new era of galactic civilization was beginning. It wasn't the future anyone had planned for, but it was a future where humanity's colonies could grow in peace, where former enemies could become allies, and where the galaxy's strongest empire had been replaced by something far more valuable: understanding.